Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. It's episode 30, and in today's episode, I talk with Dale Hudson. Dale is a longtime children's pastor, writer, author, just a pioneer in children's ministry. And he has a new book that he's co-authored called If Disney Ran Your Children's Ministry, which is great. So we talk about that book, some of the principles in there, and we even break that down in terms of what it looks like at Christ Fellowship, where Dale Hudson was the children's pastor. He actually just recently has now stepped out to serve the church overall and help, work with children's ministries and churches and various capacities. And so if that's something you're interested in, we'll talk about how you can connect with Dale. But you'll love this interview because it's really practical. The book is really practical. If you serve in youth ministry or children's ministry, the principles apply across the board. There are a lot of ways that Disney runs, that would be helpful to us as a church leaders, and especially in terms of how we lead and care for and develop volunteers. And we lean a lot into that in this conversation. So you're going to love that. All the show notes will be available at nickblevins.com/episode 30. And before we jump in the interview, I just want to remind you that you have a little less than 2 weeks left now to take the survey to share your children's ministry and or student ministry staffing and volunteer ratios. It's a great survey just designed to help all of us get a picture of what churches out there have in terms of staffing and volunteer levels for their children's ministry and their student ministry. And so over 300 people have taken the survey so far. We'd love to have your input. I'm giving away a bunch of free stuff as a way to say thanks. A ticket to the Orange Conference next year, 1 year pass to download youth ministry, full gold membership on that site. Lots of great stuff that you don't want to miss. So just go to nickblevins.com/ratio survey and be sure to add your input. But let's go ahead and jump into this interview with Dale Hudson. Today I'm joined by Dale Hudson. Dale, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Nick. Glad to be with you and the listeners.
Yeah, well, most children's ministry leaders are probably familiar with you, but for anyone who isn't, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a father of 2 boys. I'm a husband and a children's ministry director, children's ministry person for 27 years now. The church I'm at now is in South Florida called Christ Fellowship. Been here 8.5 years, and love kids ministry, love family ministry, and just pouring into other leaders.
Great. And how many campuses now does Christ Fellowship have?
We have 9 campuses, and then we have an online campus as well. So it keeps us busy. We said as long as there are still people that don't know the Lord, we're going to keep starting campuses. So I'm sure I know we have plans for a couple more next year. Again, as long as there's people that are need to be reached, we'll keep starting campuses,
That's great. And you'll be doing for a long time, I guess, right? Because most areas, there's plenty of people.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. Do you spend most of your time centrally, or do you get around a lot of campuses, or what does that look like for you?
Yeah, for several years, our original campus is called our Gardens campus. And so for the first several years I was here, when I came, I think we had 2 campuses, 2 or 3 campuses. It was still manageable enough where I could actually, direct this campus as the children's ministry director. But as we kept adding campuses, it got to the point where it was hard to do both effectively. So I transitioned probably 3.5 years ago to just to overseeing all the campuses. So, weekends find me at a different campus each weekend, going and just encouraging the staff and volunteers at that campus, doing training and giving them feedback, giving them evaluations and stuff. So that's kind of what my week looks like. During the week, it's more of developing leaders, setting the vision, direction, philosophy, and kind of helping just lead the big picture charge for our children's ministry.
That's great. We want to talk about a book that you co-authored with some other guys called If Disney Ran Your Children's Ministry, which being close to Disney there, you're really familiar with that. And I think it's a great resource. I know I was saying before we started recording that our team has read pretty much everything you can get related to Disney as it relates to leadership or experiences they create and how they do that, like Be Our Guest and Creating Magic and all that kind of stuff. So what Tell us about your co-authors that you wrote it with, and what led you three to write this book.
Yeah, the co-authors are a good friend of mine, Justyn Smith. He's a children's family pastor up at River Valley Church, a great church up in the Minneapolis area. And then the other person's Bruce Barry, a longtime friend of mine. Bruce is the founder and president of Wacky World Studios. They do themed environments for churches. And Bruce, his father actually worked with Walt Disney back in the day and helped do background artwork for some of those original cartoons that Walt put out. So Bruce kind of grew up in that Disney culture. And so we just had the idea we're all huge Disney fans, and there's so much we've learned from Disney that translates right into children and family ministry. And so it's actually Justin's idea for the book, and he approached us, and we said, man, let's do this. So we realized that Disney is the number one family vacation destination in the world. It's like, I have to look at my book, but I think it's like 50 million people will come to a Disney park just here in South Florida, in Orlando this year. And of course, the vast majority of those people are kids and parents. And so they are the experts at connecting with kids and families. And there's so much that they can learn, that we can learn from them and translate right into our children's ministry. Do we agree with everything they do? Of course not. Philosophy, things like that. Obviously, we don't agree with everything they do, but there's so much that we can learn, that we can take from what they do so well as far as connecting with kids and families.
Yeah, and you all make the point, too, that some people might think, well, obviously, if I had the money Disney had, I could create the environments they create, which would then make everything else work. But you make the point that that's not how Disney did it in the beginning, right?
Yeah,
there's a lot more that you build to get the resources they end up having.
Yeah, we've all thought that. I'm sure, I know you go to Disney quite a bit. When you're there, you're like, wow, if I just had the budget, I could do this as well. But the truth is, Walt started with no budget. And I talk about in the book how, matter of fact, he was so broke at one point that he survived for 2 weeks by eating dog food. That's how broke he was. All he could afford to do was eat dog food. But he had these principles, these ideas that he used to connect with kids and families, and the budget came from that. So a lot of it's just philosophy and things that you can do, small things you can do to connect with kids and families. And I believe if you do those things well, that people will be drawn to your ministry, and the budget will come from that.
Yeah, and the book basically outlines 10 keys, and the first one is vision. And so what does that look like practically for children's ministry leaders? You even talk about keeping vision on a loop. In other words, keeping it in front of people like regularly. So what does that look like, you think, practically for a leader? How do they do that well? Yeah,
well, I believe that every great ministry is built by a visionary leader that looks at what can be. They see what can be. That's what Walt did when he first purchased the land for Disneyland. It was just a bunch of barren orange grove fields, but he looked and he saw a castle. He saw rides, he saw families, he saw all this that everybody else couldn't see, and out of that came, the original Disneyland. And so people want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to give their lives to something that really matters. And so you want to lead by vision. You want to cast and say, this is why we do what we do. Obviously the what, if people are just focused on the what, they're going to get discouraged. They're going to not have passion. But if they're focused on the why, then I believe that'll keep you moving forward, and people will be drawn and they'll rally behind that. So, yeah, but vision. And I'm sure you've heard, if you're listening to this, you've heard the statement that vision leaks. You can't just cast a vision. It's not a one and done. You constantly have to point people back to the vision. Think about. I remember when I was a kid. I love to get beside the fireplace in the wintertime. It'd be my dad actually had a wood burning fire stove, and man, he would get that thing warm. And I would love to, in the wintertime, just lay beside that thing and soak in the heat. But you constantly had to add wood to that fire, because the natural tendency of fire is eventually to go out. And you have to keep adding that wood to that. So it's the same thing with a vision. The natural tendency of vision over time is to fade and to decrease. So you got to keep stoking that vision and pointing people back to, this is why we do what we do. And I think one great way to do that is, to constantly tell the stories. Our vision our vision mirrors our church's overall vision statement. That's to impact kids and families with the love and message of Jesus Christ. And so I constantly tell stories of how that's happening and give them examples. We were doing a training yesterday with some of our volunteers, and I took some time at the beginning and reminded them. I try every time we get together with the volunteers to say, hey, here's why you're changing diapers. Here's why you're greeting. Here's why you're teaching a third grade boys class. Here's why you're doing all these things. It's to impact kids and families. And here's some examples of how that happened last week. And I shared the story about a little boy named Dylan that came to our church and accepted Christ. And I told another story about a whole family that was reached through our children's ministry, and just letting them see that they really are making an impact. And so I think you got to constantly take people back to that vision, because again, the what gets old, but the why never gets old if you keep taking people back to that. So you want to lead by vision. And I think that also kind of translates into building your team as well. You know, if you're trying to build a volunteer team in children or youth or student ministry or family ministry, people are not drawn to desperation. They're drawn to vision. And so if you're coming across like, oh, we are desperate, please, we don't have enough people to help teach, or, you know, people are thinking, well, if it's so good, then why are you having to beg people to do it? So you never want to come across as needy, because people aren't drawn to need, they're drawn to vision. You know, come be a part of something that's great, that's exciting. You want to make an impact with your life, come be a part of this. So you know, all goes back to pointing people to the why. That's what people will give their life to.
Do you use the same stories to recruit people? Because you're talking about recruit them to a why. Do you find ways to like tell those stories, not just to existing volunteers, but like potential volunteers?
Yeah, we do. You know, we try to always recruit out of vision. We'll share those stories and say, you know, if you're looking to really make, because everybody wants to be significant. I mean, everybody really wants to know that their time here on the earth mattered. And so if you can point people to an opportunity to really leave a significant impact, I think people will be drawn to that. So yeah, we do tell those stories. We present opportunities for people to make an impact and show how they can be a part of that.
I know one thing churches probably struggle with sometimes is getting those stories. You know, I think you have to be really intentional about telling them regularly and asking for them. And because it'd be easy, like in your role, for instance, you're leading this centrally. How in the world do you get a story from this campus, you know, that happened on that Sunday back to you so you can share it? Is there a system or a process or just a culture of telling those? How did you create that?
Yeah. So what I do is every Monday morning, I have our campus director send me just a brief report. I ask them three things. What was a struggle? You know, those are things that we can work on and improve. What went really well? Those are some things that that are going well that we want to keep doing. And then the third thing that I asked them to give me is a report about some lives that were changed. And so every week they will send me stories, and they look for those stories. They send me a story of at least one story from each campus of a life that was changed. They try to send me a picture as well if we can capture the picture. But just constantly just be looking, always be looking for those stories and asking, you know, our volunteers as well, hey, tell me those stories. And I think you just have to be very intentional about gathering those stories.
Yeah, I think we've seen that too, because it took us asking regularly, and there's almost an accountability to it. Like you're saying, people have to send you that report. And so now they're thinking about that third question. So then they're asking it in, you know, huddles or wherever they can with other volunteers. Yeah. That's good. That's helpful. Yeah. And I guess eventually what you have is a culture of it. So we're all looking for it. Yeah. Yeah.
And if we have a great story, you know, we'll try to put it to video and share it with the entire church sometime. Our church as a whole is always looking for those stories. And so even though my leadership, my pastor and people always asking me, hey, if you got stories, send them my way. We want to tell those stories.
That's awesome. I think they really do communicate vision better than pretty much anything else, right? A good story.
Yeah, for sure.
Another key in the book is to construct teams like Disney. And I think, and you talk about volunteer onboarding in there and training both. And I think volunteer onboarding is probably an area where we can do really well and set people up really well or not, you know, in ministry. So what does that look like at Christ Fellowship? How do you onboard volunteers? How do you use that time really well to set them up to serve and succeed?
Yeah, for sure. You know, you do want to set people up for success. It's kind of like, you know, if you're playing football, I know you're a Ravens fan. If the quarterback throws the ball to the receiver's feet, it's going to be kind of hard for him to make the catch, And so a lot of times in ministry, that's what we do to new volunteers. We just kind of, throw the ball at their feet and expect them to do well, or we shove them in a room with 30 preschoolers and say, good luck, there you go. And then we wonder why they don't last. And so it's very, very important to set them up, for success. Kind of our process that we follow is when we invite someone to serve and they say, yes, I'm interested, we go ahead and capture their information just on a brief little form there. Because, if you don't follow up, a lot of times they'll forget or you'll forget. So we immediately capture their information. Then we have them fill out an application. After the application, we sit down with every potential volunteer and we do a personal interview, a one-on-one interview, and we talk with them and find out their gifts, their personalities, get to know them. Then if we feel like they're a good fit for the team, then we run the background check. Because, we don't want to spend the money on the background check if we get in that interview and we're like, I don't think so. And so coming out of the interview, if we think they're a good fit for the team, we'll run the background check. Once the background check clears, we invite them to an orientation. And so they come to the orientation. In the orientation, we cover more of the big picture stuff, the 30,000-foot view, the big safety and security issues, the why, just the big things they need to know. And from that, then they get passed off to their individual areas they're going to be serving in for hands-on training for several weeks. And so that's kind of our process to set them up for success. If they're going to be like a small group leader, in elementary, we would put them with another small group leader for 3 or 4 weeks just to shadow until we feel like they're ready to step out on their own. So that's kind of our onboarding process for new volunteers.
How often do you do the orientations?
Pretty much every week. I mean, if we're doing our job well, we try to have, it takes people maybe 2 weeks to get through the entire process, but pretty much we try to have one every week. Recruiting, inviting people to join your team is not a once in a while thing. We know every single week we've got to be inviting people to join our team, and so we have that culture of inviting people every single week to join our team. We have a large volunteer team, but the way we built that team was just one person at a time. We don't do a lot of large from the platform. We need volunteers. It's pretty much just one-on-one invites, and then our adult discipleship does a really good job as people go through our new members class. Coming out of that last class, it's expected that you're going to serve somewhere. If you're going to be a part of the family, family members contribute. And so we go to those, that last class, the new members class for the adults, and we are actually there present. And so if they want to serve in children's ministry, we connect with them right there and get them started on the process. So that alone pretty much every month gives us a group of people coming into children's ministry serve, which is great.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think a lot of churches, that's a missing piece where there are classes for, new members, new attenders. We've thought through a little bit about how to help them take steps, but we haven't integrated serving with that. It's and sometimes it only goes to small group or some kind of discipleship thing. Yeah. And leaves out serving.
Yeah, we've kind of found church-wide that serving is the super glue that will keep people connected to your church and will keep people not falling through the cracks. Because, when you're serving, just like and a lot of people, their small group serves together. But if a person's serving, they're going to be accountable. They're going to be expected to be there. So we found that serving is kind of a key component to keeping people connected to your church. So it's a huge thing. And you're right. But before, if you can suggest serving in that last new members class, a lot of people say, okay, I'll think about it, and they'll fall off into the abyss. But if you're actually there, we're actually there in the room, and they have gotten the list of serving opportunities the week before. And then that last week, we're actually there at the end of the class, and they get up right there and they choose the area they're going to serve in, and we connect with them right there on the spot. So that helps us not lose people through the cracks.
Yeah, I love that personal connection, because it'd be easy to say, well, they can fill out a card and I'll contact them that week. But you probably gain a lot more people by meeting them right there on the spot. How often do you end up having to go? Does your team have to go to those? How often do you do those?
So we have the new members class is 4 weeks, and so the fourth class each month is the sign up to serve class. And so we're there. It's during the service. So we're actually, one of our either staff or volunteers is there present once a month at that class.
Is one of the other classes about groups? or something like, small groups connecting that way and people can do that as well?
Yes, it is. There's an introduction to the church, what we believe, the basic stuff that you would cover. But yes, that's you're expected to, as a member, you're expected to be part of a small group, serve and attend worship. Those are the three big things.
Yeah, I think it's the same in most churches. It's the same for us. We found that just naturally people did almost an even split in terms of whether they would serve first or get in a group first.
Yeah.
But personally, I'm with you, and even Carey Newhoff on this podcast, he was on here recently, and he said that if he had to pick, he'd tell people to serve.
Oh, yeah.
And he was talking about how that's not necessarily maybe the popular thing or might be a little controversial, but I think he's saying the same thing you're saying, that in some ways it might help you stick longer and grow your faith more.
You have relationships there, and you have commitment there. And I think Carey had shared as well that engagement is what drives attendance now, not just attendance. It's the families that are engaged and serving. They're the ones that are going to be consistent in their attendance. Yeah,
and you're obviously a lot more engaged when you're serving because you're part of making it happen. There's some responsibility there, definitely. Yeah. How do you train volunteers? You talk about that in the book, but what does that look like at Christ Fellowship? You mentioned that you were, sometimes you'll be at a campus doing training. So, the onboarding part obviously is really, really helpful, and then there's ongoing training. What does that look like at Christ Fellowship?
Yeah, for sure. And I think the big picture that we try to see is that, we're not called to make volunteers. We're called to make disciples. Serving is a huge part of being a disciple. I don't think you can be a fully effective disciple without serving. So we try to see our volunteers as someone that we are called to disciple. And so a huge part of that is investing in them and helping them grow as a leader, helping them grow in their ministry skills. And so we have there's a couple main ways that we do that. We try to really look at we call it a huddle, pre-service huddle, whatever you want to call it. When you get together with your volunteers before the service starts.
Yeah.
We try to be very intentional about that pre-service huddle, that we don't just show up and, just randomly do anything. We actually have scheduled out what we're going to talk about, what's going to be a part of that. In my book, I give the kind of the elements that we incorporate into our pre-service huddle, but we go into that huddle with a teaching. It's just a 5-minute teaching, but it's going to be a teaching that's going to help them grow in their ministry skills. So, think about it. If you do that every week, that's 52 mini trainings right there that you can, pour into people. So the pre-service huddle is a big one for us, being very intentional about what we talk about and the elements of that. And then outside of that, we do 3 trainings a year. We do one in the spring, and I actually go to the campus and we do the training, live training there at the campus. We actually do it. It depends on the campus. Some campuses actually during the service. Some campuses it may be after the service. We do that in the spring and late fall, November-ish, and then in August we do a church-wide global training where we all come together to do a training to get ready for the fall. So there's 3 big live trainings per year, and then there's the every week pre-service huddle training that we do.
I know a lot of churches obviously do like a huddle, and it's really helpful, or some may be transitioning to that, like they want to add that. But something you hear all the time is how hard people, or how difficult a time they have pulling them off and getting people to attend. And so what does yours look like practically, and what have you done to help people attend it?
Yeah, we have Saturday and Sunday service. So we have one on Saturday before the service starts at 5. So we will meet at, we'll meet about 4 o'clock, from 4 to 4:15. And then on Sunday, we have one before each service. It's a little more challenging. We have multiple services. We have 4 services on Sunday, and some of those are 30 minutes just in between services. And so we have to be strategic about where we meet and who's going to meet with those people. But we have decent turnout. Everybody doesn't come, but we try to make it exciting, and we can really pour into them and care on them. So we have a good number of people that come to that every week. But yeah, it can be a challenge at times getting people there. But I think if you make it, someone said the reason people don't go to training is because they've been to it before. So you want to make it fun and exciting. We usually try to honor a volunteer at that and give them a little gift card or something, and we have some fun, tell some jokes, and try to make it a little bit of fun as well. But so that's how we do that.
And like you said, obviously you're putting a big emphasis on it. You're spending time on it, preparing for it. You said the gift card, recognizing people. And so I think that's probably what helps it become what you want it to be, is that it's not just showing up early and winging it, you know?
Yeah. We know exactly what we're going to teach on. Some weeks it'll be motivational. Some weeks it'll be spiritually, how to grow spiritually. And some it'll be just, here's how you connect with boys. Here's how you can communicate with preschool, practical stuff. You
mentioned, that we're called to make disciples, and so we have people in our teams, and you're thinking about that. How much could ministry leaders, how much time should they invest in discipling the people on their team versus knowing that, small group is a part of that strategy as well, right? And so there should be some discipleship happening there. For you guys, how do you view that? Do you view that like, well, we're both in this together, and so we're trying to disciple our volunteers as well and help them grow their faith? Do you just look for small groups to take care of that? What does that look like for Christ Fellowship?
Yeah, it's a partnership. We try to make sure each volunteer, one thing for sure, we say that if you're going to be a part of our team, that you're going to attend worship, and we hold them accountable to that. Because you'll have people that will come and serve, maybe not get connected to worship, or they'll start missing worship. So we want to know them and know where they're at spiritually and where they're at in their spiritual growth. So we make sure, first of all, that they're attending worship. Student ministry, we have a lot of students that serve in our ministry. We require them to stay committed to student ministry and make sure they're still connected and part of student ministry to serve. So that's the first thing, is making sure they're in worship, and then making sure that they are in a small group. A lot of our leaders and our volunteers will start small groups together. And then if not, then we try to make sure they're plugged, into another small group somewhere in the church. I think the big thing is just knowing your volunteers, shepherding them well, knowing where they're at spiritually, knowing if they're struggling, knowing what's going on in their life is so important.
What is that structure-wise? What does that look like? Because I think a lot of churches struggle with whether it's a church of 300 and it's one staff person for all the volunteers, or maybe it's a church of 1,000 and there's a couple staff, but still maybe there's a couple hundred volunteers, and they struggle with, how do I regularly connect with each volunteer so I know them? And obviously Christ Fellowship is large, multi-site church, so you have some system in place to make sure people are cared for one-on-one. What does that look like?
Yeah, we have volunteers, and then we raise up volunteers that care for other volunteers. So there's layers there. We have what we call a coach. So a coach would be a volunteer that would care for 8 or 10 other volunteers. They would be the one that would call them and help disciple them. And so let's say, for example, we have a coordinator that's over 1st through 3rd grade. Well, under he or her, there will be, 5 or 6 volunteer coaches that will care for 8 or 10 volunteers under them. And so it's there's no way, like I said, there's no way one coordinator can care for 100, volunteers that serve in his or her area. So their job is to raise up volunteer coaches who will help be shepherds to those people. That's
good. There's a lot of conversation, I think, about that role in church world now. Some churches like yours have been doing it for a while, and you've kind of figured it out, and others are just starting to figure it out. So I'd love to just ask, how have you recruited to that role? What does that look like? How do you train them? Because obviously there's more leadership responsibility there, because now you're saying it's almost like a small group leader. We're asking you to help disciple the people on your team.
Yeah, but we just watch people. Obviously you're going to look for somebody that's faithful. You're going to look for somebody that's committed. You're going to look for somebody that's spiritually mature, and someone that's passionate. And it's just a shoulder tap. And so, I see something in you. I think that God can use you can broaden your influence, that God can use you to impact and help lead other volunteers. And so it's just a personal shoulder tap and an invitation to step into that next level of leadership.
Would you say it's more, when you're looking for a coach, for instance, you mentioned 1st through 3rd grade groups or whatever, would you say it's more important to find someone who's going to be like that good pastor almost? They're going to disciple and they're going to care? Is that more important than even the specifics of the environment they'll serve in? Like 1st through 3rd grade, it's actually more important that they're going to care for adults and lead them than it is that they're good at leading 1st through 3rd grade small groups or whatever it might be. Yeah,
because that normally when that person steps into a coach role, they may or they may not actually interact directly with the kids. I mean, they would be like in the environment, but they might not necessarily be leading a small group. They would be going around checking on the people that are leading small groups. So I would agree with you on that for sure.
Yeah, because I think that helps people too, because sometimes they only look at people who've already served in their ministry, when they actually maybe could go ask someone who hasn't served in their ministry and would be a good fit for this role, even though they may not be a good fit for leading kids in a group.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, for sure. It's so much. So isn't Nick the ironic thing about children's ministry? It's really, and student ministry, it's really just as much about the adults that lead the kids and students as it is the kids and students. I mean, man, if you can raise up adult leaders, you're gonna be in a world of hurt.
Yeah. It happens, I think, quickly, because any church over 100, probably in size, feels that. You're already getting to the point where you can't lead all the kids, all the students. You can't be the only one on stage. All those roles. It becomes about leading adults. Yeah, you'll be the cap. You don't want to be the lid to the ministry, and you'll definitely be the lid if you can't multiply yourself, for sure. So one of the other keys in the book is about culture, and I think all of us, anybody who's been to Disney, knows that there's a culture there, and you could probably describe it like you'd say, well, I noticed this, and this is pretty consistent. So how do we as leaders shape our children's ministry or youth ministry culture to what we want it to be? Like, how did you create that culture at Christ Fellowship that, of course, now is just being replicated at campuses? Yeah. But what does that look like from the ground up, sort of? Like when you haven't, it's not where you want it to be yet, and so now you got to do some work to create the culture you want. Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, your children's ministry culture needs to reflect the culture of your church. I think my job is to take the senior pastor's vision and translate that into children's ministry. My job is to take the senior pastor's culture that he's trying to create at the church and translate that into children's ministry. And so I think what drives your culture is your core values. You can say you have a culture, but if your core values are not driving that, if what you believe and how you do what you do don't reflect that, then you really don't have the culture you think that you do. And so we live and die by our core values, that they are what they shape, and they are what form our culture. And so we always, constantly point back to our core values. If we have something that's counterculture to the culture we want, we're gonna take that to the core value and say, hey, this doesn't line up with our core values. And one of our core values is all for one, which is unity. We believe that God will bless unity, and so if we have a volunteer that is maybe gossiping or talking sideways, we'll take them to the core value and say, no, this is our core value, and this is not lining up with our core value, and so we've got to stay in line with our core values. And so I think that's what drives the culture engine, is your core value. So you got to decide not just what you're going to do, but how you're going to do it. Write down your core values, and then that's what forms your culture. And your core values, they're church-wide, right? It's not a separate list for kids ministry. Yeah. Yeah, we believe that. Obviously, we have some things that maybe my job is to translate those core values into children's ministry world. Anyways, our core values is that's what drives our culture. And did you, because, core values church-wide can be whatever, like they're obviously not kids ministry specific. Do you have any other language things or things you say or do in children's ministry world or youth ministry world to clarify that culture even more? Does that make sense? Yeah, we do. We in our orientation, we have what we call children's ministry principles. Okay. Just kind of a philosophy of ministry. Like one is we believe in application, not just information. Okay. We believe church should be a place that's fun. We believe church should be safe and secure. So there's probably 10 or 12 principles, which would really be our philosophy of children's ministry that we do cover in our orientation. That's good. So you have the church culture and values, and that way people understand, how we want to serve as a church, what we want it to look like. But then even in children's ministry, it gets more specific. Here are the principles. Yeah, and they get those core values when they go through the new members class. They're going to get those core values, but then we constantly try to emphasize those core values. Even like I was talking about some of our pre-service huddles, we may teach on something that supports one of those core values, because again, those leak just like vision does. Yeah, and definitely.
Principles are more philosophy of children's ministry.
Yeah.
Why we believe church should be a fun place for kids. Why we believe in not just information, but actually applying God's word to your life. Why we believe in partnering with parents. Those type things.
Yeah, that's good. You cover that in orientation.
Yeah.
What you said is like 30,000 foot level, so that makes sense. How about first impressions or guest services or whatever a church might call it? I mean, I think sometimes in children's ministry that can be overlooked, but it's not overlooked at Disney. Like they do a great job of that. So what can we learn from Disney about how to do that well? What have you done, at Christ Fellowship to help the guest experience be a good one, be a great one?
Yeah, man, that is so big. Here's the deal. You can follow up with someone. If a person has a bad first experience at your church, I don't care how many times you call them, you email them, you go to their house, they're not going to come back. So I think we spend all this time on follow up where we should be spending our time on the first experience they have at our church. I was at a conference one time and somehow got put at the table with the lead senior pastor of probably one of the top one or two largest churches in the country, and I was shooting him all these questions. This was probably 15 years ago, and I said, "What do you do for follow up?" He pretty much said nothing. He said, "We create these irresistible environments that people they're drawn back to." And so I wonder how many times we spend all this time on follow up, whereas we should be spending our time on creating these irresistible environments that will draw people back. So, yeah, the people that we talk about in the book, that people actually decide if they're going to come back to your church or not in the first 8 minutes. So the sermon starts a long ways before the pulpit. The sermon starts in the parking lot,
Yeah.
And so, just making sure, like having a separate area for first-time guests to check in, walking guests to their room. Don't just point where to go. In the book, we actually share some things that Disney employees are not allowed to do. Like one example is they're not allowed to say, "I don't know." I don't know if you've ever experienced that when you're there, but if next time you're there, ask them a question. You'll never hear them say, "I don't know." What they'll say is, "Let me find out the answer for you."
Yeah, it's just a slight change, but it means a lot more.
Yeah, and Justyn actually wrote that chapter. And he actually lists 6 or 7 things that a lot of times, I actually did a blog post about this last week about things we say that we shouldn't be saying. Like even something as simple as saying "no problem." He talks about how that kind of indicates that there could have been a problem. Yeah. So instead of saying "no problem," it's better to say like "my pleasure." If you go to Chick-fil-A, they're the experts. They always say "my pleasure." So there's little things like that you want to make sure that you say. Those little things make the difference. And I think I talk about in the book that even though no one owns the guest, everybody owns the moment that they're with the guest. Every person that guest comes in contact with, that person makes an impression on that guest. I actually we do a survey with new families. We ask them if they will give us feedback on their first visit. And they give us feedback. And I always tell our team, I don't want to see the ones where they said, "Oh, you guys were great. You guys were awesome." I said, "Show me the ones where they had a complaint or they had something they didn't like." And about a year ago, one of the guests had filled out the feedback, and they said your safety and security was great. You walked us to the room, but she said, "But the lady that checked us in at the classroom never smiled one time at our family." And she told us that, and I was like, wow. So we had a training about that. Smiling is so important. These guests, they are watching everything that you do, and so smile, make them feel welcome and accepted to be there. So those little things make a huge, huge difference.
I think I heard one time, maybe it was Jeff Henderson said this, that "my pleasure" thing that you hear Chick-fil-A employees do took like 5 years to get from leadership all the way to the front lines where it was actually happening. So that's a reminder too that this stuff takes time.
Yeah, it does. It does.
The culture.
Got to be very intentional about it for sure. But yeah, people have a great experience. They'll like you go to a crappy restaurant, your revenge is you just don't go back.
Yep. Yeah, and they don't know about it. It's like church. I mean, they may not know you had a bad experience, so then they don't change anything, and then somebody else has the same experience next week.
Yeah, it's funny to me too. I'm not knocking these churches, but it's always funny that you go to these churches and they have the reserved parking for the pastor and the staff. The best parking, it says reserved for pastor and staff.
Yeah.
Whereas we were taught, our staff parks in the worst parking. We want to be the ones taking that long walk and not our guests. And so we have reserved parking for guests because you don't want them to spend that first 8 minutes riding around trying to find a parking spot. They're just not going to come back.
Yeah, we have reserved parking for volunteers too, and we don't really tell them till the very end of the process. That way they don't like, oh, you're already in? Okay, good. By the way, you got to park all the way behind the office. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
We even had to put signs out there to help encourage it more. But it's the same principle. We want it to be easy for guests, to come, which is good.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, this has been really helpful. We could talk about all these, and everybody listening should obviously get the book because we only hit 3 or 4 of the 10 keys, and there's so much to it. I think what I love about it, like you said, is that it's practical. You can walk through it and use it as like a guide. Like, I'm going to work on my onboarding. I'm going to work on my culture and just live in there, for a few months or something in that chapter. That would be good. We
put at the end of each chapter, we put, I know when I read books with my team, I always like to, we sit down and discuss, what we've read together. So at the end of each chapter, we've put, some discussion questions, just some starter questions that teams can discuss together about what they read in the chapter.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think it helps people take what you wrote and apply it, which is good. Which is the goal, right? It's not just read it and agree with it, but do something with it. How can leaders connect with you, get the book, if they have any questions or anything like that?
Yeah, the book is at just kidmenmouse.com. You can get it there, ebook or hard copy, kidmenmouse.com. And then my personal website is relevantchildrensministry.com. I blog there 5 days a week, just stuff that I'm learning. And, main reason I write those posts is just so that I'll keep learning and I'll keep growing. And so I like to share there with stuff I'm experiencing here at Christ Fellowship and things I'm learning and discovering along the way.
Yeah, that's great. I follow it as well. Well, Dale, thanks for coming on the podcast. Thanks for writing this book. It's really helpful, and the co-authors as well. We appreciate your time. I will finish by saying my pleasure. Good job. Well done. Thanks for all you're doing to invest in other ministries and helping other leaders. It's really appreciated. It makes a big impact. Thanks, Dale. I appreciate that. You bet. You have to get that book. I promise you, it's really good, really practical. And just like I was saying there at the end, you can take it and just walk through it and apply it to your ministry. And I think where you can really lean in is your onboarding process for volunteers and then your ongoing training process. Like, how do you help them continue to grow, continue to develop? The book would be really helpful for that. I mentioned in the intro that Dale has now stepped out of his role there at Christ Fellowship, and he's just interested in helping the church overall, the Big C Church. And so if you feel like you'd love to have Dale come and help your children's ministry and give some input and evaluation, which I would highly recommend. Dale's an awesome leader with tons of experience. You can reach out to him. His website, we'll have it in the show notes. It's relevantchildrensministry.com, like he talked about. So you can follow up with him there. Everything we talked about is in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 30. In terms of action items, I usually talk about some things you can do to apply it. I really think it is just get the book, walk through those steps. And then, as I said, I'd love to have your input on that ratio survey. Just go to nickblevins.com/ratio survey, share your church's ratios, and then you'll get those results too, and kind of look at where your church compares with other churches. In the next episode, I talk with Dan Scott. Dan and I talk about story, the power of story, how it's used in the Bible, and how we can use it as we teach kids and students to make sure that they're getting the most out of it, that we're not just taking it apart, that they're really getting the power of story and what God's trying to communicate. And so we talk about that, and we talk a little bit about practically what does it look like to train and develop those who do teach kids and teach students. So you don't want to miss that. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Family Ministry Podcast. Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.